Okay, so welcome everybody. Once again, this is Kit 145A. Welcome to Tim, Maddie, and Evan, and we're going to start off with Maddie today.
Am I ready to go? Yay.
Yes, please.
Hello, everyone. Cheers to health, happiness, whatever makes you smile. And hopefully part of it is doing this together, because it sure does that for me. So these questions, per usual, are put up just in case your mind needs a little something to chew on. I find quite often, both with people in the trade but more often than not consumers, they like a little information. So some things to consider if you feel like it, or if your mind goes blank in approaching this wine, to consider what, I don't even know if florality is an actual word, but to consider, oh good, yay. To consider if the florality in this wine is strong or mild. Not only for enjoyment, but it might be as the saying goes, a tell in terms of the varietal expression. And to look, sometimes we talk about, earth, fruit, oak, etc., flowers, but it's not uncommon to have savory elements in wine. And I think it may rear its head more often in red than in white. So I put that option up here. Spices that are not sweet spices like cinnamon, etc., but more different variation of pepper, herbs, dried and fresh, and veggies. And then finally, and if I squeak a little bit, I'm just getting off having lost my voice. Felt just fine. Yes, the color. Against a white surface on an angle will reveal what it actually looks like. And then finally, the texture. Lean, round, austere, or smooth. Quite often that leads to you're focusing on the wine's expression of structure, alcohol, acid, phenolic, bitterness, etc. So we are going to look at it initially, and I think we need, we're not putting up anything yet, I'm talking through it. So visually, this wine to me is a true straw color with green glints. So it is telegraphing youth. It moves quickly in the glass, and the tears are more of a sheeting action. So it's not giving me much of an indication of alcohol or sugar. Though, there are some legs worth talking about, probably some nice dry extract, which Tim defines beautifully in his book, if you haven't picked it up, as soluble, bright particulates in suspension. So aromatically, this wine is aromatic, but I wouldn't call it, it's not a pushy, loud aroma, but I don't have to fight for it. It immediately gives me some sweet citrus in the form of maybe Meyer lemon and some yuzu. Very clean, very attractive, immediate minerality on the nose. The hackneyed phrase, rocky minerality, like in this case, probably wet stone. It has some stone fruit, actually some tree fruit in the form of, to me, tart pear, green apple. And then maybe a little bit of tropical push there, like kiwi. And then there is a florality to this wine, but it's not a dominant note for me. At this moment, it's more like gentle lime blossom, maybe a little apple blossom. The nose is very, very pretty. A little bit of lemon verbena, maybe a little bit of that non-sweet spice I was talking about. It's an intriguing fragrance. It's subtle but distinct, and I'm gonna go ahead and take it on the palate. I squeak when my voice goes up, so I'll try not to do that. The attack is a little bit of a surprise because the acidity is really medium plus, verging on high. Interestingly, the alcohol content seems to be quite moderate. I wouldn't call it deficient, but I have to look for it. It's not rearing its head in the least. The finish is clearly phenolic, and that is to remind us all a little bit of pleasant bitterness that is usually born from either the juice or the wine post-fermentation coming in contact with skins. I'm going to immediately take another sip, and I'll tell you why. This is my first wine of the day. And quite often the acidity and or tannin, if we're doing red, which we're not quite yet, is a little more aggressive than it will be when your tasting machine gets used to it. So acidity is still medium plus for me. Alcohol is moderate. The wine is sort of, I heard this term recently and I liked it, linear. It's sleek. It's a little tight, but it's got length, absolutely. There's that phenolic bitterness again, strong mineral component. Everything I smelled is being reflected on the palate, particularly, both sweet and tart citrus, Meyer lemon, a little bit of lime, yuzu, the tart tree fruit, green pear, green apple for sure. If there is stone fruit, it's not peach apricot, it's more in the form of, let's say, yellow or green plum. Teeny bit of tropical, but not much. Kiwi, I mentioned that earlier. Something else is presenting itself in the finish. And the green elements of fresh and dried herbs, a little bit of a peppery component, not black pepper because it's subtle, so more white pepper. Lettuce leaves, a little bit of caraway. So there's definitely a savory element to this wine, juxtaposed to strong minerality and almost aggressive acidity, phenolic bitterness, and length. Absolutely no oak aging on this wine. If there is, I don't believe them, even if they say that it's neutral oak, because it would have relaxed the wine a little bit. However, if you hold the wine mid-palate, which is a trick of mine later in my career, I find that you get a sense of the wine's depth, and also, which could, be a result of older vines, or the mouthfeel, independent of the acidity. There is a presence of lees contact in this wine that is, not so much about flavor, but it is about texture. So in addition to that acidity, we've got some concentration and some roundness behind it. I find this wine to be subtle, but expressive, rather exotic and long, high quality. Okay, rock and roll with the poll, which I'm going to remind everyone, because Limang always does this, and I want to jump on board here. It is anonymous. Please, nobody's going to point a finger at you and go, of course it's not Chenin Blanc, right? And you really help yourself thinking it out and one another. If you really don't think it's one of these three, by all means, vote for other. And by all means, take a gulp and express it in the chat room, because, sometimes I'm looking at the bottle and going, I don't believe it. So we've got Gruner Veltliner, Albarino, and Chenin Blanc, which I think, Tim, you might refer to this little pack 03 as evil dwarves, because they can be mistaken for one another. All three of them can have medium plus to high acidity levels, especially the Chenin will often have piercing acidity. Albarino, if it were to distinguish itself, has, in great examples, what we'd call classic, though I like the word benchmark, actually, will have a strong florality of fresh flowers. And Gruner, depending, because lots of variants of Gruner are made in terms of its expression, light, rich, full, even some with botrytis, will often have a savory element to it. Classically, I think we mentioned lentil and things like that, maybe caraway. Chenin, white peach, apricot, the famous wet wool, which if you're not old enough to have washed a cashmere sweater, you may not know what that smells like. So regions, what do we have for choices? Austria for groovy, Albarino from Spain, and Chenin from South Africa, because I'm on a personal mission to bring to everyone's attention how good South African Chenin Blanc can be. And it's been 10 years since I've been, so I'm probably on a mission to go back and to go to Swartland. And then finally, California, which can embrace Chenin, and for sure, And maybe little pockets of Albarino. I haven't had Groovy from.
There is Groovy. There's
Is
Groovy
there
California
Groovy?
wine, definitely.
Excellent, great. So that, how are we doing on the
We're doing
voting?
great. You know, I have
Yay,
to
I
say,
encouraged everyone.
72% participated. Very
Whoa.
good. I'm going to end this poll right now and we're going to launch the results. And for the 28% who did not participate, try for the next round. So 56% have said that it's Gruner, 33% that it's Albarino. So I think it's worth explaining between the two, either before or after the reveal. There is a 6% other. So let's hear, you know, what the other could be. And you could put it into the chat if you don't mind. And I think that in this particular case, the region is really tracking probably the variety choices. So anything to add?
The only thing I would say, especially if we're wrestling or, you know, considering or having a dialogue between Gruner and Albarino, really what pulls Albarino ahead of the pack aromatically will be a strong florality. And Gruner, to me, of Gruner, you know, Albarino and Sienna is probably the trickiest. But again, that savory element, which in this particular case, I think is presenting itself in the finish. Bravo, and thank you to the people who voted for South Africa. Yay. So we are ready to get on our plane. I am per usual because I'm not a princess. I just like to walk around. I'm in an aisle seat. And if someone was generous, business class, and we're leaving San Francisco. So as we're going to where we're going, I will tell you what's really interesting about this wine to me. It is, it's labeled as an L&T, light and dry, but in, yes, leicht and trocken, Austria. So we are indeed in Austria. We're in what, Southeast Europe. It's a member of the EU now. We are from a wonderful producer, Weingut Brundelmeyer. Really, Brundelmeyer has been canonized by, you know, every critic in the business. And I think recently, from Falstaff was named one of the 25 best winemakers of all times. He is located in the Kamptal, which is Niederösterreich, Lower Austria. You know, this whole lower, higher thing. Alsace does it too. I always get confused because it's actually in the north. And so he is in a region that has a reputation for incredibly high quality. Particularly for Gruner Veltliner and for Riesling as well. It's very interesting in terms of a subdistrict because it is impacted both with from the cool air coming down from the northeast. So there's you know, significant amount of forests that are moderating that impact from the Alps. There we are, Kamptal, which has its own river, the Kamptal River, and it's off of the Danube. Significantly further north. I mean, not, you know, a long way, but there's the Wachau, which embraces both the north and south sides of the river. And the Kamptal is also impacted, particularly during harvest, from the warmer winds coming in from the east, from Hungary, the Pannonian Plains. So 2021, we're saying we're accepting 2020, but I'll tell you, in my approach today, here and now, that's a 21. It's a baby. I would even verge on 22. Just really sleek. Larger region is Niederösterreich. Subregion is the Kamptal, which really buys with the Wachau and Kremstal and other areas as being arguably one of the best qualitatively regions in Austria. Gruner Veltliner, if we can talk about it, for a moment, is the most important native grape variety in Austria. It's Austria's thumbprint. Austria is small in terms of wine production, and not even 1% of its land is covered with grapevines. But in terms of quality, it's staggering. You know, post the antifreeze scandal in the 1980s, which you can read about on your own time. What they did is they roared back with the strictest qualitative controls in Europe and have come up with the DAC and other sub-controls as well. But this is a grape variety that needs water, so irrigation is allowable and used. Almost 90% of it is planted in the Niederösterreich, Lower Austria. It is, the winemakers often refer to the white pepper and phenolic expression of it, but they're very careful not to overdo it because the grape variety, which I didn't realize till today, is actually rather thick-skinned. This producer, Willy Brundelmeyer, is unique in a couple of aspects. He uses absolutely no malolactic, which is common in Austria, but also he produces something that he refers to. I'm trying to find this so I can read it to you. He produces a type of, oh, here it is, a seasoning by taking a tiny proportion of his grapes, held back, destemmed, and macerated for 12 hours. And he'll use this almost like a seasoning. Isn't that wild? His vines are on an average 50 years old. He employs an MW to help with thinking out both wine growing and vinification. And his Riesling is as stunning as his Gruner. This, by the way, if you're looking for, you know, the tags of Federspiel, et cetera, and Schmaragd does not exist because we're not in the Bacau. Those are particular to that growing region. But I will tell you, it's worth going on a mission to get his Riesling, because I think his Riesling was the first time I put my nose in an aware state in a glass of Austrian Riesling, and it knocked my head back. Here they are. Andreas Witkoff, who does a lot of the online interviews, is in the middle. He's the MW. And Willie and his wife, whose name I cannot pronounce, are off to the right. Ah, thank you very much. I think this wine benefits from exposure to air and from warming up because it's just starting to bloom for me. Sorry, go ahead, Lene.
So I just want to make sure Dipankar had a really great question, which Tim answered, but it was in the host and panelist thing. So I want to make sure that everyone sees the question. Dipankar asked, according to Dipankar's notes, Gruner can have a peppery flavor. And did you get this? And Tim had answered that he's got it more on the palate than on the nose. Maddie, did you get that peppery flavor?
I did, but not on the nose. And I agree with Tim completely. I really think it revealed itself in terms of the varietal in the finish, sort of mid-palate and as it ended. So this is a wine that's a little tight and young. And if it frustrated you because you didn't get lentil, celery, you know, caraway, and white pepper in a strident fashion, neither did I. But I think you could, using your deductive technique, take it away from Chenin, which would have more peach, apricot, stone fruit characteristic and even more blazing acidity, and away from Albarino because of the lack of overt florality. I think it reveals itself. It reveals itself on the finish. I agree with Tim completely. And this is one of several Gruners they make, and they intentionally called it light and trocken, light and dry. And I'm taking all of 10 seconds to read this. This is Willy Brundelmeyer. This is why he is who he is. Look at that smile. There is pure joy when work from an entire wine year is so tasteable in the glass. Great.
Oh, that's great. What a great quote. Excellent. Well, guys, don't be shy in asking questions, and don't be shy in telling us what you guys think of this wine as we move on to the very next one. Evan, you're next.
Thanks. Madeline, is always a treat to follow you. I feel like the guy who bats second after the leadoff hitter, who always gets on base, who can spray the ball all over the field, and who puts me up and sets me up for success to move you to second, which I now
You could have a double play, Evan.
There you go.
Evan had taught me about
baseball.
Wow,
good.
Oh, if you want me to hit you with a double play, Maddie, that's mean. That wouldn't be nice. I'd be out. Anyway, bravo on that, and a really lovely dissertation on Brundelmeyer, on Austria, on the state of Gruner Veltliner and all that. So a tough act to follow, but let's give it a shot. Anyway, as you grab glass number 2 and give it a look, and it's always nice if you have the opportunity, which we do obviously here, unless you're just using one glass, and that's harder, but I'd encourage you to try and always have one glass for each one if you're in a position to be able to do so. That if you look at them side by side, they couldn't be, frankly, more different than they are. Whereas the first wine was sort of very light straw with a very discernible green edge and sheeting down the sides of the glass, reflecting that lower alcohol content in cooler climate, which obviously is directly reflected in lower alcohol content. The second wine couldn't be any more different. Not only is the color darker, not only is the volume of color more intense, but the color itself is sort of verges on that deep yellow color, pushing gold for some people maybe, and it's still, and if there is green in there, it's so masked by the hue of the wine that you probably won't be able to really pick up the youthfulness or lack thereof until you smell the wine and ultimately taste it. As you do swirl it and tiering and legging and all that stuff is always predicated on the cleanliness of your glass. You hear people refer to glasses as needing to be beer clean. If you ever poured a beer into a glass that wasn't perfectly clean and then wonder why there's no head on it, a lot of it has to do with the cleanliness of the glass. Legs will only form in perfectly clean glasses. If your glass has any detergent or residue or whatsoever, you won't get it. So I say that for both education, but also it's not the all to end all sort of thing. Let's go ahead and smell. This is where all the fun is. I always look for, as you know, for those of you who have been with us for a while, a few things, FEW for earth wood. And right off the bat, when I smell this, I'm getting the first thing and I'm getting the last thing, and I'm struggling for the piece in the middle. So there is clearly a lot of fruit here. And it is definitely a very fruit-forward wine. It has a lot of very ripe citrus to it, so more in that sort of orange, mandarin sort of vein. There's a ton of tree fruit on this wine. I would say yellow apples. I would say brown pears. A lot of stone fruit too, peaches and nectarines, sort of somewhere between the fresh and ripe stage, whereas the other ones are definitely ripe. And dare I add, almost a very light marmalade-ish character to it. A little bit of that sort of confit character, not strong, not overly dominant, not desiccated, not honeyed, but definitely there. A bit of pineapple maybe. A little bit of pineapple upside down cake, maybe, for those of you who are fans of that, which then leads me to the next thing I'm getting, which are all of these sort of more stronger, oakier type flavors. So in my first question there, what is dominant and hits you? Some of you, it's going to be that fruit, but for some of you, it's going to be a lot of the oak clues that are picked up on here. And what am I finding here? Well, I'm finding that sort of cakey sort of thing. I called it pineapple upside down cake. Some people might call it almost an angel food cake character to it. There is definitely sweet spice elements. There's vanillin. There's a hint of sort of a butterscotch or caramel or toffee-like character. There's indeed just a very faint hint of buttery popcorn, although I wouldn't put it in that over the top. I can't believe it's not butter, over exaggerated vein, but it sits there in the back. And then as I'm sitting here looking for my earth, I'm just not finding a lot of it. Maybe there's a touch of, sort of basic organic earth there, but it's not the way the wine that Madeline just came at you, which you were hit by this very strong, minerally, stony character. You're not getting that here. Let's go ahead and give it a taste. Right off the bat, when I'm struck with, not only as I'm sitting here worrying, not worrying, but planning on seeing how the flavors are reflecting each other back and forth, I'm noticing just the volume, the texture, the roundness, the richness, the, dare I say, creaminess of this wine, because this wine is as much to me defined by its weight, body, and texture as it is echoing back on those sort of character of fruit that we talked about before, the character of oak that we talked about before. But there is a joy, to quote Madeline, or to quote Willie, I think is who she was quoting, in really having pleasure in what's going on texturally in your mouth, because I think that's one of its hallmarks. The wine is deceptively long. So although it doesn't have the shrillness that the wine that we just came off of had, I can still taste it. And I can taste it in sort of a nice, elegant way with a subtlety of expansion in the back palate. I'm actually picking up even more going on as I'm breathing back through my mouth. So this is a wine that shows tremendous interesting character. It's a wine that's driven by richness. I put the body weight at somewhere around medium full. I would put the acid here as being medium plus. I wouldn't go down as medium. It's not as low as that, but it's certainly not high. So I think medium plus for today. Again, we're always showing on how a wine shows today, not necessarily on the day that it was gridded in our tech notes here. And I would say it's alcohol level. I got a little bit of warmth going on in my chest. So I'd probably say it's medium plus as well, which is usually alcohol and body, generally reflective, generally mirror each other. I put the complexity level at medium plus also. I think there's a lot going on here. It's a delicious wine, and I think it screams from the singularity of one voice rather than being a blend. I'd be a betting person. I'd put it as a mono-varietal wine.
Evan, here's a question. Is there a slight bitter finish for you?
I'm personally not getting so much bitterness. I think what you might be picking up there is a soft phenolic character. It might be more, it's certainly not as strong as the first wine. It could be coming from the varietal if the varietal itself spent time in contact with its skins, even for a relatively short period of time afterwards. But it's quite possible that it's coming from the oak too. You remember that we do pick up tannins from oak barrels, particularly if they're newer and smaller. And that can also give you that sort of same soft phenolic pull there, although it's in a different way than it would be if it was fruit. But it could be softly phenolic. It's not a dominant character there, but if somebody said that, I certainly wouldn't kick them off the boat.
Great. There's some comments here that it's like butterscotch candy. You get that with that creaminess that you were talking about, the oak.
Absolutely. If anybody is a fan, talk about what are your soft spots in life. I like those Werther's, Werther, butterscotch candies that you can sort of suck on for there. There's a little bit of that Werther's character in this wine for sure. So let's see what we've got opportunity-wise as far as varieties go. We have our old friend Chardonnay, which is sort of classic and can fit a lot of what we've talked about here. But we've also got a white Rhone blend. And I think before you sort of automatically dismiss that, think for a minute. The white Rhone blends can be yes Viognier, but they can be yes Marsanne, they can be yes Roussanne, they can be yes all of the above, plus probably about 5 to 8 other white grape varieties in there, and can also be strongly textured. They do require a lot of sun to ripen and have oftentimes a roundness to them. Semillon, particularly in parts of Washington State and parts of Bordeaux, will express texture and richness and pear types of fruits and characters. Maybe not so much in Aussie part of the world. They tend to be a bit more bracing there for their Semillons, but all of those are reasonably good choices. Clearly, you have the Association of France could play with all of the above. Spain probably could play mostly with Chardonnay, although there are pockets of Semillon and some people with a few crazy Rhone varieties there, most notably things like Syrah. California can play in all those places, and Australia can certainly play in all 3 of those places too. So you're not going to be wrong in terms of an association of a grape with a geography. You just simply need to harken back on any experiential that you have and see where it takes you. Or other. If you have another, throw out another. We can always talk about it a little bit.
Don't be afraid to throw out the other.
And please vote. I want to beat Maddie's 72%.
We're at 80%. So I'm going to close right now, and we're going to share the results. We have 48% of people voting for Chardonnay and 29% in Rhone. And we do have Scott. Thank you so much for throwing it out there. Viura and Rioja, Spain. So Evan, some thoughts?
Yeah, well, certainly that, like I said, I could understand the white Rhone Chardonnay quandary, particularly if the person making the white Rhone style of wines is using oak on it. That's not always the call. Some people who are real traditionalists with white Rhone blends tell you that oak can easily dominate the wine and make it there. But from a textural standpoint, that is not a bad call. Oftentimes, particularly if you're dealing with the less aromatic varieties like Marsanne in Rhone blends, they can be reflective and allow things like winemaking to take over. So not an awful call there at all. If it was a higher Viognier or higher Roussanne component, you might have more lifted perfumes and aromatics than you would typically with Chardonnay, which is essentially oftentimes a relatively straightforward canvas until the winemaker gets involved and plays with oak and malolactic and lees contact and stirring and all sorts of other stuff. Semillon, again, there are a couple of people, particularly down in the southern part of Bordeaux, that would do that, but I think you would get a much stronger sense of minerality, a much stronger sense of place and provenance through terroir in those wines than you're getting on this wine. Even ditto on the Rhone blends, I would caveat that by saying that if it were a Rhone blend style, and if that was your call, I would probably lean you towards the New World rather than the Old World on it, simply because the Rhone wines coming out of the southern part of France, be it the Rhone Valley, be it the Ardèche, be it even Roussillon and Languedoc, and more Languedoc than Roussillon, you would probably get a bit more terroir as well too. So I see that reflected in even the lower amount of French entries there. Reflective there probably means people are moving back and forth between New World and Old World, which
looks like people are trying. Yeah,
Cool.
it looks like people are trying to decide between Old World and New World with a 38% and 43% California. So let's see where we're at.
Yeah, well, let's leave our fabulous Austria. I'm going to stop in Vienna for a quick tass of tea and a Viennoise pastry on my way out. Maybe catch a little music while I'm in town. But I'm going to head back up in the air, and I'm going to head back to the New World. And I think a lot of the parts of the wine were expressing that strong fruit, that rich texture, that higher alcohol level, the acid level that was more muted, certainly, than the wine there. And we're going to find ourselves back into North America. And we're actually going to land ourselves down, not super far from my house, maybe about an hour or so, deep in the throes of vineyards. Okay, we're going to have to get this one right here. Vineyards that sit in the Russian River, but a winery that sits in Napa Valley. So when we actually land the plane here in just a second, and hopefully it'll be a smooth ride down here, we're actually going to land at the winery, which sits in the Con Creek area of Napa Valley, even though this is actually sourced from a couple of vineyards over in Russian River. And I think this is important to bring up, only before we jump in and chat about our friends over at Buehler, to say that in so many wineries these day and age, they are multi-sourcing their fruit. So another winery that we're friendly with and we've used in MTW before is Amici Winery. Amici sits down in Calistoga and is really renowned for their Cabernets and Cabernet wines made there, but all the Chardonnay they source is from Sonoma Coast, et cetera, Russian River. And here Buehler Vineyards, which sits, as I said before, just off 128 in Concrete Creek, is doing that too. And then anybody who's making wine out of the Santa Lucia Highlands, hell, there's only 6 wineries in the Highlands, but you see those wines appellated on wineries in Napa, wineries in Sonoma, et cetera. So this is a very New World phenomenon that is worth bringing up. So the fruit that is from here is indeed from Russian River. It is indeed from that so-called sweet spot of the Russian River, which is the Middle Reach. It's important to understand as you look at that map there on the right-hand side that it's a pretty monolithic appellation. It's gargantuan. It sits right in the heart of Sonoma County and covers a large chunk of it there. So they break it up as you move from west to east, cooler to warmer. And when we talk about the Middle Reach, we're talking about that area that off West Side Road and River Road that sits just adjacent to the town of Hillsburg, which as you move away from the coast, the fog gets in later and burns off earlier. So they get a lot more exposure and sun and ergo more ripeness in their fruit, et cetera. So the 2 vineyards where this Buehler wine comes from, one is literally called the Wood Vineyard on River Road. That's actually the name of the vineyard. So it's called the Wood Vineyard and it sits on River Road. And the other one is called the River Vineyard. I guess maybe that's why they distinguish the 2, which sits just on East Side Road. But they're 2 lovely vineyards that have been sourced by this particular winery for 23 years. They've been working from this pair of vineyards in that particular winery. So even though, I should say 25 years, they've been making Chardonnay for 25 years, and they've been sourcing for 23 years. That's what I meant to say. So that again, classic area, classic Middle Reach, that's what gives you the richness. That's what gives you the texture, along with things like malolactic fermentation, which is going to soften the edges, give you a bit of that sort of buttery, butterscotchy, lightly popcorn flavor. But there's a beautiful character to the fruit here, which is giving you a bit of that, as I called it before, pineapple upside down cake, pear, clafoutis character that you would get, that gets you sort of a custardy, cakey element there, more of a cooked, it sounds bad in the context, it's not meant as a judgmental pejorative, you're a character of that fruit, but it's also just perfectly ripe and wonderful. John Buehler, proprietor of Buehler Winery. He's been doing it for as long as his father has. This winery is fourth generation at this point in time. They have 300 acres of vineyards in the Con Creek area of Napa Valley. As I said before, while they're known for Cab and known for Zin, they do source their Chardonnay on the outside. David Cronin's been making their wines for some time and does just a delightful job. And John Jr. is running his father's past.
Evan, since you were talking about the climate and the cake character, here's a great question from Venkat. He says he always thought that Russian River was a bit cooler, and maybe this one feels a little bit more like a hot climate Chardonnay. Is this typical for Russian River? What do you say to that?
Well, as I said at the outset, it's not a monolithic appellation. In fact, if you deep dive into the Russian River, and go to their website, it's really worth exploring. They actually break it down into 6 what they call neighborhoods that run from the cooler areas of Green Valley of the Russian River Valley and the Sebastopol Hills at the far western part of it. And as you meander up the river, it gradually gets warmer till you hit the middle reach, which is the second warmest. And again, this is all relative. I would not consider Russian River to be a warm appellation until you actually hit on the other side of Highway 101 in the Eastern Hills, where there's more Cabernet, frankly, planted than there would be Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. But it is part of the Russian River appellation. So I say that to simply show you the range and not to want to take Russian River and put it in a little box and put a little bow around it, because it's simply not that. Having said that, in order to get Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, which are the varieties that are most signature to this area, to have character, if it gets too hot, Chardonnay would become bland and generic. If it gets too hot, the Pinot Noir would taste jammy and almost pruny. So you need to have that. And as I said before, there is literally most of the vineyards in the Middle Reach flank the river themselves and do have fog that banks in and releases every day. It's literally as it breathes, pulling in from the ocean and pulling back out. Because you're far in along the river, it takes a little bit longer, so you get a riper character. This is what I would say is quintessentially most people's mind's eye vision of what Russian River Chardonnay is. It's not going to be as lean and bright as something you might find in Green Valley or the Sebastopol Hills, but it is, I think, for people's expectation, this is the wine that delivers for them.
And one more question before we move. The Australia versus California, because there was a good 14-15% of people who thought that it was Australian. How would you distinguish between California and Australia Chardonnay in this case?
It's not going to be always obvious. There's cool climate California Chardonnay. You can see it in Santa Rita, coastal West Coast, Sonoma, etc. There's cool climate Australian Chardonnay too that you can see in Margaret River. You can see in the Yarra Valley and places like that. There's slightly warmer Chardonnay, like you'll find in this part of the Russian River here, and there's certainly warmer climate Chardonnay to be found in a lot of places of southern Australia as well too. I would say it's not obvious. I would say that over time and with experience, there's a slightly different expression of fruit character there. I tend to find the Chardonnays that come from warmer climate Australia, at warmer climate, again, all relative there, being a bit more tropical in nature, whereas the California ones tend to show a bit more tree fruit. And as it gets cooler, more of the tree fruit comes out in Australia to the point where some of them can be downright lean, citric, and bright. It's not always obvious. And I think if you get good quality New World Chardonnay here, and we're mincing hairs between Australia and California, most people would give you a hall pass.
Great. Okay, Tim, you're up. Wine number 3.
Okay. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Now for the first red wine of flight, and everybody take your glass number 3. And as you tilt it forward over a white background, let's take a look. I can read through mine pretty easily. So, the concentration color is medium at best. You might be thinking about whether this is a thinner skin versus a thicker skin grape. And before going further, I skip a question. So let's talk about them. And the first one is about that very thing. What does the wine's depth of color tell you about the potential possible grape varieties? That's important. And there's other things that you can extrapolate. And if we can remember, we'll talk about those. And then for you, as you smell and taste the wine, what are the most important non-fruit aromas and flavors? We'll talk about those in just a second. And then finally, how would you describe the tannins, the texture of them? Are they soft? Are they astringent? Are they gritty? We'll find out. Okay, so getting back, so the wine is a medium ruby red color, goes out to the rim or edge or meniscus, whatever you want to call it, and that is a lighter ruby. It's a pink, which means the wine is still fairly young. Yep. And then as you swirl the glass carefully, or you rotate it at about 45 degrees, just note that the wine does not stain the glass. And that's a combination of a couple of things. One, that once again, this is not a wine made from a thicker skin, heavily pigmented grape, but also the term that Maddie referred to earlier, dry extract. This is not a wine that has a high amount of dry extract, okay? And we'll get to that when we taste it. On the nose. So the wine really, connecting the dots, I mean, the wine really follows through from the color. So it is a lighter color, a ruby red color. And those wines usually have red fruit dominating. And here that's really true. So I would say there's things like red plum, red cherry, maybe even Bing cherry, some cranberry, and really fresh strawberry. And the fruit qualities here are fresh and ripe and tart. And again, that connects to the fact that it's a really youthful color. There's a little bit of black fruit going on here, and it's black fruit that's lifted, that has acid, like blackberry and black raspberry. And once again, those are fresh and ripe. All righty, so let's check out the floral. And when you do that, you put your nose above the glass. And yeah, there's some really delicate, really pretty rose petal and maybe even jasmine there. And then now we're into the savory, the secondary, the non-fruit type things. For herbal, to me, there's a little bay laurel. There's a little tea, a little bergamot, a little lemon verbena too. And then beyond that, things that are heavier and richer, there is some mushrooms, some brown mushrooms, maybe some star anise, and for lack of a better term, just cola nut. So this is like cherry cola for adults, and you gotta love it. And usually, by the way, that cola thing is from oak aging, right? It's the torrefaction. It's you're caramelizing the inside of the barrels. As far as earth and mineral, there's a little bit of turned soil, but not much. I mean, really, fruit dominates here, and along with these herbal notes. And then finally, there's definitely some oak aging here. Probably a mix that's dominated by used oak, but there's a little bit of new oak. I know that because there's vanilla from the vanillin in the wood itself, but there's also some brown baking spices and some sandalwood and some star anise. And if anything, yeah, that's a really forward fruit quality. So let's taste it. And as you would expect, but still the red fruit dominates the wine almost entirely. Notice how the fruit quality though turns tartar, and you would expect that, especially in red wine. One more thing I want to add to the non-fruit savory type things is that we've got some whole cluster fermentation and some stem town. So everybody take a sip of the wine this time. This is for science. Hold it in your mouth for a few seconds. And notice in the mid palate, that's between the fruit and everything else, that's the finish, the acid, the oak. There's a green stemmy twiggy quality. It's like sucking on a twig, okay? And that means that, at least part of the ferment was done in whole clusters. And if you got whole clusters, you got stems, right? So that's really common winemaking for certain kinds of grapes / wines. Okay, otherwise for me, the finish is really tart fruit, but also a real toastiness and spiciness from oak. A little bit more on the finish and the palate versus the nose. In terms of the structure, everybody, I advise you as your attorney, retaste the wine, wait 3 to 5 seconds, because structure for most people is a delayed response. Ready? Okay. All right, that's yummy. Okay, the wine is dry. First of all, it's medium body. Acid is medium plus. Notice your salivary glands are working. Now that you spit it out, you can say, oh, and inhale. And I get heat right down to here. And that's medium, bordering on medium plus alcohol. Okay, I'm going to call it medium plus. A really just bare medium plus. And then the tannins are soft. They're medium, but they're soft tannins. Okay, that's really important. The texture of the wine is soft. For lack of a better word, it's smooth. Finish is medium plus and complexity medium plus. This is just a well-made, delicious wine. Okay. And so, Lee Meng, let's have the poll. It's time to vote, everybody. We were in Chicago last week, Madeline and me, where people supposedly vote early and often. That's the saying. Okay, so here are your choices on the menu. You've got Gamay, Barbera, and Pinot Noir. Okay. So Gamay, I want you to think if it's a classic example of Gamay with this kind of color, what else would you have winemaking wise? You'd have a couple of things, one of them in this wine, but one of them is missing. And as a result, the fruit quality is very, very different. Okay. Barbera, and that's where the Italy choice for regions comes from Piedmont and Northwestern Italy. And, think about how the color would be different, how the acid would be elevated, and also how there would be even a little bit of grape tannin in the front of the mouth. And then finally, we have Pinot Noir. And as far as that goes, you've got Oregon, okay, and possibly Argentina, because they're doing some really delicious Pinot Noir in Patagonia down there.
Don't they make Pinot Noir in France too?
Oh, they do. Well, I was going to get there, Evan. A tough crowd. Okay, so so those are your choices. Your first real, before you even get to the grape variety, you got to decide what dominates the wine. Does fruit or things other than fruit dominate the wine? And that will lead you to a place. And then in terms of the structure, you look at those three grapes, and really one of them has more tannin than the other two. One of them has a distinct winemaking technique that's used with it usually. And then there's the third. Okay. So without giving too much information away, how many people have voted Li Meng?
I think that the first red wine of the flight, people are a little slower to vote, but that's okay because there are three more for you.
Come on,
Yeah.
jump on board.
Okay.
Oh, we're done. Okay.
All right, so here we go. We got Gamay, Barbera, and Pinot Noir. So Gamay, what I was looking for, I'm looking for carbonic maceration. Yeah, so I'm looking for the Jolly Rancher, Tutti Frutti, Candied, confected type quality of fruit, and then you get the stem inclusion, because again, you're dealing with whole clusters. I'm also looking for a stony mineral quality, because if you're in Beaujolais, the soils are either this blonde limestone in the north or granite in the south. And it's very pronounced. And the wines tend to be acidic. They're deceptively dry on the palate versus, the Hello Kitty type nose. For Barbera, just more depth, more density, and depending on the style, because there are several styles. One of them old school and extended time in used oak. Another one all stainless steel and very fruity. But at the same time, the grape has more tannin, it's got more acid, and that tannin manifests itself in the front of your mouth, and maybe more alcohol. And then most of you went for Pinot Noir, and I think that's an excellent call. And if you were between France and Italy, again, ask yourself, is this wine earthy or not? Okay. And the answer is it's not. It's actually quite fruity, savory herbs, and then the oak, and you have some turned soil quality. So I really couldn't go to Europe with this one at all. Okay. Lots of people went to Oregon, which I think is like an excellent deduction. And then nobody went to Argentina. Okay. So let's get on the MS Evan Goldstein, Master of the World.
As we go there, can you talk a little bit about why it's not Côte de Beaune Village?
Well, okay, so Akeem, that's a really good question. First of all, Côte de Beaune is a lower appellation tier-wise, quality-wise, and Village as well. And so odds are a Côte de Beaune Village wine would not have this kind of oak on it. It just wouldn't. They don't spend the money on those kinds of wines. The wines would also, Côte de Beaune Village would also be acidic, more acidic, maybe a little sharper tannin, and it would be earthy, really type earthy. And a lot of people use stem inclusion there, and it really sticks out because this has so much velvety fruit. This is kind of like a down comforter on the palate. It's just really a velvety texture, and it's just pretty. All right, we are indeed in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. One of the icon producers, at least to me, one of the first 10 wineries in Oregon. So Pat and Joe Campbell, for whatever reason, and I'm sure their entire family thought they were nuts. I'm sure their kids thought they were insane because they moved to the middle of the Willamette Valley. They lived in a trailer for the first several years while they, put in the vineyards and then constructed a winery. And, their mission was to make great Pinot Noir in Oregon, just like David led to Irie some years before. And their son Adam took over in 1995. So he really, was committed as well. They make over 10 different Pinot Noirs now. They also make delicious Pinot Gris. I've always been a big fan of that. They make Riesling, which actually won the first medal in 1978. And what else? They make some delicious sparkling wine. But this particular wine is their Willamette Valley. And it's a blend of their 6 estate vineyards. They're all permitted separately in small stainless steel. They do twice-a-day punch downs. And then it's 10 months in a mix of used and new French oak. And to me, just style-wise, it's elegant, it's restrained, it's seamless, and it's quintessential Oregon Pinot Noir. Yeah, yum, yum. So, distinguished colleagues, what do you think? Do you like it?
Maddie?
I love it. And it's actually rather forward and complete because quite often, and I believe this is not a single vineyard designate, correct? It's their Willamette. Let's hear it for that because quite often, we think that the single vineyard expressions from more specific sub-appellations in the Willamette are better. Well, maybe long-term, they're more impressive, but they really, Oregonian Pinot to me, that's really ambitious, takes time to express itself. So I think it's wonderful to be able to get our hands on something that speaks Oregon, but is actually quite open and friendly.
Yeah,
And
it's
thank you.
actually,
Mhm.
I was gonna say, you talk to winemakers and they'll tell you that oftentimes making the regional wine, in this case, Willamette Valley, but it could be somebody in Russian River, it could be somebody in Sonoma Coast, is actually harder
Right.
than making a single vineyard, because a single vineyard is an expression of an absolute place. But when somebody in their mind's eye says, you say Willamette Valley, or as we just came off the Chardonnay, you say Russian River too, through their gross experiential things, they have this sort of sense of what that palette should be. And it's the same thing if you were to say, I don't know, Vosne Romanée or Volnay in Burgundy, there's a regional sense of something like that. So that actually becomes harder. And a lot of winemakers, to be interesting to ask Adam up at Elk Cove rather, it would be interesting to say, do you find this harder or easier? I know certain winemakers who actually say that they'll make that Willamette wine first because they need to use the various pieces they have to create a flavor profile, kind of like blending a scotch or blending a tawny port or something. And then if they have enough of the other components left over, then they make the single vineyards. But I think, Madeline, to your point, making these regional appellations that sing to people and deliver to
Drink now,
right? Hard job.
And are affordable. And I loved what Tim said to someone's response, to someone's question. As a response, he said, why not Bourgogne Rouge or Côte de Bon Village or something like that? The amount of oak, no small thing that, that can be as telling as structure.
Yeah, and oftentimes when you declassify down in something like, first of all, we would never put something, just so that you guys know, we would never put a Bourgogne, a straight Bourgogne there. The geography is not specific enough for anybody to actually be able to get it. The most we would ever do would be a Haute Côte de Nuit, Haute Côte de Beaune, Côte de Nuit Village, Côte de Beaune Village type thing. And ditto here, I wouldn't give you a wine that was just Oregon. That's like way too hard. You need to have something to hang your hat on. But I think also that at that quality level in Burgundy, your acid levels would be shrill. The wines would be more austere unless you were in perhaps 2020 as a vintage. And you would get more pronounced, to Tim's point, stemmier tannins and more grit to the wine.
And Tim, I'm at the risk of sounding completely silly. So from my perspective, and I'm seeing a couple of people here who thought that it was French, I did get mineral elements or earthy elements. Was it a lot less?
As we say here in New Mexico,
okay.
A tiny bit. And everybody, I tell you what, rather than address this, we're going to address this, say, after the end of the next wine or two, and the conclusion will be undeniable. Okay.
Okay, great.
All right. So let's get to wine number 4. And now for something completely different. Everybody, if you still got your glass number 3, I want you to take a look at both of these wines side by side. Tilt them forward. Yeah. Okay. So wine number 4, the color is evolved a great deal. Okay. Wine number 3, the Pinot Noir, we said is a solid medium ruby red. As you tilt glass forward, notice that it is garnet. It's reddish brown, which means what? That means oxidation. And odds are, we're not sure, but we suspect it could be either oak aging, which is a gentle form of oxidation, or it could be just the wine is old, okay? And we're going to find that out as soon as we smell it. But this wine to me is a medium garnet. It still has a little bit of ruby red in it, but I'm going to call it medium garnet ruby. And notice that the edge is even more evolved. So the edge is a lighter garnet. And everybody, that's how it works. So the core center of the glass, the color is always going to be younger or less evolved than the edge or rim. Okay, that's how it works. All right, so we're suspecting that the wine is old or has been an oak forever. Yeah. In terms of the depth of color, it's just about the same as the Pinot Noir. So I'm going to call it a medium garnet with ruby light, lightening out to a lighter garnet rim, almost orange. Okay. The wine does not stay in the glass. The tears, legs, Marangoni is medium plus. Okay. Now for the main event, the nose. Okay, so Dipankar, I don't know how you like your steaks. This is really savory. First thing to note is that, yeah, we're connecting the dots. The wine's old, right? So everything about it is dried. Everything about it, okay? The fruit is predominantly red. That connects the dots to the depth of color once again. And I would say it is like red plums, red cherries, maybe cranberries or craisins like you used to give your kids in school lunches, or maybe you should still do. But everything about the wine is dried. So the fruit is dried or even raisinated, okay? Which means the wine is old. Other things about there's a little bit of darker, like blacker plum, but again, it's on the border of being almost like prunes. So the wine is dried and it's aged. As far as the non-fruit type things, there is potpourri above the glass, maybe dried rose. And once again, notice I'm saying the word dried. And then there's quite a bit of herbal type things. There's like tomato leaf, there's pimenton peppers. What else? There's dried savory herbs. And then there's both earth and mineral to this. Okay, so I would say it's a very curious combination. So it's a chalky, almost terracotta. I mean, the smell reminds me of a hot day in terracotta brick together. There's also a dried turn soil and like dried mushroom quality to it as well. What else? A little bit of red licorice and leather, which you would get in most older wines. But the main event for me on the nose is the oak. And unlike the Pinot Noir, the oak is really predominant on this, okay? And it's got a very distinctive note. So there is a lot of vanilla, a lot of spices. And yes, there is dill and coconut and toast, and oxidative notes from the wine, but also just having seen on an extended time in oak and things, there's like walnut and walnut brittle and marzipan, things like that. All right. And if anything, we can just say over and over again, there's oxidation because the wine is older. Okay, everybody taste it, please. Wow. Okay. All right. By comparison to the Pinot Noir, this wine is bone dry, right? It's medium bodied. It is profoundly earthy. Okay. Notice, like the Pinot Noir, though, that the fruit really tartans up quickly on the palate. It is really tart. And what else about it? The leather, the savory herbs. There's even something like oregano. There's star anise, that pimenton. There's a dried pepper, red pepper type quality. And a little bit of sandalwood, but there's a lot of oak. But before you get to that, notice that it's got a chalky texture, really dusty, chalky texture, and at the same time, it's mushroomy and earthy. So earth and mineral together, and that really drives this wine. And then there's the oak, and the oak dominates the finish. But notice that this is not your new expensive $2,000 sexy, French barriques. This is something besides that. It tastes like a mix of oak, but that dill, coconut, pronounced spices. Yeah, it's really strong and intense. And then the acid really drives the wine. The acid is medium plus. The heat, the alcohol is medium plus. The tannins, medium plus. So I would go back to the Pinot Noir and call those medium, but these are medium plus. And the finish is long, and this wine is really complex. And part of it is, of course, because of the age, but part of it is just the wine itself. Okay. All right, so we have people saying, yes, American oak, but let's talk about that in just a second. All right, so Li Meng, the poll, please. Yeah, this is delightful wine. And this wine, by the way, needs food, right? Your choices here are, Cabernet Sauvignon and blend, okay? Think about the color and the tannins of that wine, what they would be like. Tempranillo or blend, and then Grenache and blend. And with Grenache, think about structurally how that would be different from this wine. Yeah, in terms of the alcohol, the ripeness, also the pepper and the savory qualities from Rhone type varieties. All right, your country choices are France, which could be for the Cabernet Sauvignon and blend and the Grenache and blend. Spain, of course, for Tempranillo from several different places. California for possibly the Cabernet, maybe even the Grenache blend, and then New Zealand. Okay, so those are your choices. Connect the dots, and let's see what we come up with.
I think, Tim, because of the contrast with number 3, We have
Yeah.
people firmly in the old world now.
That's an excellent conclusion. And that's why I didn't answer the question at the
I
beginning.
love
of
it.
this
Like,
wine is
it really-
profoundly earthy. Yes. And then
Yeah.
everybody go back and taste the Pinot Noir now. And it's just utterly delicious, but it's not about earth and mineral whatsoever. Okay.
So
All right.
I can end the poll. I think we're 84% participated, probably the highest of today so far.
Excellent. All right, so we have some people going Cabernet. Everybody Cabernet is a thicker skinned grape, and the wine would look more like wines 5 or 6. Okay, it would be much deeper in color, and Cabernet it would have tannins and alcohol. Okay, Tempranillo we're talking about in a second, and then Grenache not too much, but also Grenache, could be this color, but the alcohol most likely would be 14 or 14.5, very rich and peppery and savory and all sorts of sanguine type qualities. So everybody went to Tempranillo, and bless you for that. We are in Spain. Kevin says marzipan gave it away for me. Okay, cool. But everybody American oak. So once upon a time, when all of us, the 3 of us, were studying for exams, all Rioja was done in American oak. There were pterodactyls too. It was a long time ago. But now it's not the case. And more often than not, Rioja we're tasting today are done in French oak, or they're done in Hungarian oak, or who knows. But you still come across traditional producers, and this guy is one of them. And American oak, if you're not sure what it smells like bourbon. Okay, so if you get confused with American oak, just buy a little bottle of bourbon, open it once in a while, drink some of it too. Manhattan's great. Okay, but that's it. And remember that the American oak is just wider grain, so there's more vanillin, and when you post the barrels, you get more torrefaction and caramelization and all that stuff. So you just get more spice, and you do get the dill and coconut. So those of you that feed into that, good on you, and job well done. We are indeed. We're in Spain, and we're in Rioja, and the producer's name is Alberto Orte, and this is his La Antigua Crianza. He calls it Classico. Crazy thing about it is this guy is kind of an iconoclast. He's kind of an exception to the rule, because usually Crianza by Spanish law, or Rioja consortial law, is 2 years, 1 year in oak, 1 year in bottle. This is 4 years. So he aged it 2 and 2, and then he hung on to it for a long time. Right. And I'm going to park an important thought over there and get back to it. He also, he's a pretty amazing guy. So he has a law degree, but he went back and got his master's in enology from the University of Madrid. And then he lives in El Puerto de Santa Maria, which is in Jerez, which is where sherry is. So he makes wine in sherry in Montilla Moriles, in Yecla, which is Murcia, and then in Rioja. So he's got projects going in several of the iconic places for Spanish wine, but he's a specialist in old vines. And also he has the knowledge to do clonal, research, and he's identified, 22 clones, heritage clones in Jerez alone. And that is Alberto. The grapes of this wine came from a valley in the northern part of Rioja Alta, and unusually it's at 1,800 feet in elevation, which is unlike most of the grapes and vineyards in Rioja. And old vines, they have to be hand farmed because it's a steep hillside. And I think a very, very distinctive style of Rioja, but also just really complex and to me really intriguing. Okay.
And can I ask a quick question, which I think would be illuminating? I know to me and possibly to everyone, the difference that you would perceive, if you perceive, between the barrel aging and the bottle aging.
Mhm.
Great.
Well, I'm not sure, Maddie, if there is such a distinction. Obviously, the longer the wine is in oak, the more the oak dominates. If anything, what gives the bottle age away to me is just the refined texture of the wine. Because that's a wine sitting in bottle, and the chains of tannin molecules getting longer over time.
Right. And
That's
does that beautiful acidity come from Rioja Alta specifically?
no. First of all, this wine, in terms of the breakdown, is like, I think 70% Tempranillo, and the rest is 20% Graciano, and Mazuelo is 10%. And both of those other grapes also have high acid. So I think it's
Gotcha.
a combination of the whole recipe together. And Jerry, of course, asked a very esoteric question. Way to go, Jerry. He's heard that the vanilla in American oak is more pronounced than French, partly because how the oak is split, either with a grain or across. And Jerry, that's sometimes true, but not always. I would say, generally speaking, American oak is just wider grained as a tree, right? And if you've got wider grain, you've just got more vanillin chemically in the wood itself, which when you toast it is going to give you more of what we call vanilla.
Great. I love this picture, Tim. The fact that the vines are so old.
Yeah, they look like, little gnarled aliens. And also notice the soil. There's nothing else growing on it. So it's really barren and incredibly dry. Yeah.
And so they can't be dry farming this, are they? Like,
yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Especially, and also he's probably not standing in the vineyard where the wine came from, because it's really a steep hills. Yeah, and you just can't irrigate. Evan, anything you can add to that? Just curious.
No, just a quick thing. Rioja Alta is actually the part of Rioja that is indeed closest to the Bay of, I believe it's the Bay of Biscay, coming over south of the Basque Country, if you will. So there can be, depending on pushes through the hill, the Sierra Cantabria, something, so it can be cooler climate and the acidity levels can be pushed there, but you're absolutely correct in your blending areas. Quick discrepancy, the label said 2010, the wine is definitely 2013.
Yeah.
But what's important to note here is that it is a crianza. So despite the fact this is the current release, I might add, of this wine, it's a wine that, again, if you think about what's going on and the ferment that's going on in Rioja, it's, people scratch their heads and go, well, why would you keep it that long? Well, I think his goal here was to put, to manage his oak, to your point, to extend the bottle age and to release this wine at a particular time to express a specific style. Alberto is an extraordinary individual. And by the way, if he doesn't have enough to keep him busy, before we move on to the next wine, he is one of the principal investors of Olé and Obrigado, the importer in the United States that brings in some of the best Spanish and Portuguese wines all over this country, and he is one of their primary investors.
Yeah, just a note about the vintage. So when we say that the label is wrong, we're talking about the label that was shown on the PowerPoint, because sometimes the graphics that come from the web or from the winery don't have the latest vintage on there, so the picture is wrong. But if you look at your bottle, and if one of the three of you, because I've given my bottles away to the staff to taste already, if one of you can hold it up, at the very back of the bottle, you will see the actual vintage. And on that is gold. That is saying 2013. And so the bottle is indeed a 2013 vintage.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So.
All right. And now moving from these two wines to sort of lighter, varying levels of gossamer tannins and acidities and things like that, we move on to wine 5. Serious wine, right? So right off the bat, when you look at it, listening to what Tim was talking about in terms of transparency, this wine is a very deeply pigmented wine. It borders on the opaque. My eyes are reasonably decent and I can still see light going through the end, but it is an extremely concentrated wine. It is very much in that sort of deep rubyish vein with a sort of softer ruby towards the edge, but fairly monochromatic, 2 shades of the same color there, which suggests to me generally a younger wine. When I hold this wine around my glass and simply spin it there and pull it back, I'm noticing that a very faint purple extraction level, again, that high dry extract that Tim talked about earlier, permeating this wine. So I'm expecting a wine of concentration and depth and power and youth when I get it, and probably a fairly thicker skin grape by virtue of that sort of depth of pigmentation. Okay, let's give it a sniff. And it's a pretty powerful wine right off the bat. As I go through my fruit, my earth, and my wood, I'm getting fruit here for sure. And the fruit is both of a red and black vein, somewhere in the realms of currants, both red and black, plums, both red and black, cherries, both red and black, but definitely not as fruit bomby, certainly not confected, certainly not jammy. These are at the ripe, just ripe to ripe thing. There is a push. There are elements of some of the fruit that would suggest certainly warmth and ripeness there, but I wouldn't call the fruit as being jammy or baked or cooked in any way. So that's what I'm getting there. As far as other flavors, there's other stuff going on here. There's definitely herbal and other thing component, vegetable. There's olive going on, black olive. There's a sense of tobacco going on. There's a sense of cassis. There's florals. There's lavender. There's violet. There's that anisey sort of black and red licorice character, probably more black in this case than it is red. And then you get, as you delve deeper and you put your nose into the wine, you get the pepper, right? And the pepper is green peppercorns, like if you make steak au poivre, steak Diane, if you're getting black peppercorns crushed and cracked, arguably even a little bit of pink peppercorn in there as well too. It's strong. I'm getting sort of an herbal thing going on there. I'm getting notes of almost soft rosemary, but thyme, marjoram. I'm getting an underbrushy thing going on there. I'm getting herbal flowers, like when the flowers come off of the herbs, thyme flowers, rosemary flowers, things like that. So not just the nature of the pure herb itself, but as much the floral components, the essential oils of those herbs too, and then a lot of just sort of general underbrush to it. Am I getting oak here? Yeah. But it's not the main star. It's not even the best supporting actor. It's not even the assistant director's wardrobe director to the best supporting actor sort of thing. So it's there for aging, but not much more. Yeah, and earth. There is beyond that sort of pepperiness that's there is sort of a very stony, and I would call it more minerally hard, almost granitic character to the soil profile here. And then once again, underlying all of that, there's a smokiness to it. There's a soft sort of charcuterie character to it. Some people might call it bacony a little bit, but there's definitely that profile there that is there. There's a lot going on. And the more I promise you that you swirl this wine, the more it's going to unravel literally in front of your mouth. Let's go ahead and taste it. That's a tasty wine. The attack is a bit hard. The acid level is medium plus. I wouldn't call it quite high, but it's definitely on the medium plus side, and certainly nothing, not even, to quote Madeline Triffon, not even a scooch towards medium. It is definitely medium plus. The tannins on it are present. I would put them somewhere at medium plus to actually high. I think they're actually well managed, but I think they're fairly ample in style. And they are somewhat astringent. I'm definitely getting a drying character in my mouth. My alcohol level is probably moderate to moderate plus, probably more on the moderate plus side than anything. The acidity level is medium plus. I mean, it's definitely carrying through the flavors. The complexity level is high on this wine. There's a lot going on. I keep coming back to it, and there's more and more going on. I could eat up all of Madeline's time talking about the wine, but I will not do that. And what else I would just say? Yeah, just sort of high. I mean, there's medium plus to high in everything you do. And high and medium plus, by the way, are going to skirt a little bit depending on your own perception of it. So I'm probably more on the higher side than the medium plus side, certainly on the alcohol tannin, more on the medium plus side, pushing high on the acidity level. But it's an awfully good wine and an awfully complex wine, I might add. So did we go over everything there? Yeah, rocky earth, stony quality. Yes, lavender and violets. And yes, red and black fruits, but no blue fruits, no blueberries, no boysenberries. Those are actually relatively unique to a small family of varieties, which we can talk about later. What do we got choice-wise here? Well, we've got Cabernet Franc, either pure or as a blend. We have Syrah, either pure or as a blend. Why do I say Cabernet Franc and then I say Syrah? It should be Cabernet Franc and then Syrah. You have Sangiovese either by itself or as a blend, and then of course you have the ubiquitous other. We have Italy for our Sangiovese, although they do make all of those other grapes as well too. We have France playing in all the categories except Sangiovese, although I would suggest there's probably somebody down by that Italian-French border that might have some Sangiovese in there in Vin de France. Australia does all of the above. Washington State actually does all of the above. So we're trying to give you great range and diversity.
Evan, there's a question here whether it's chocolate or cocoa. I'm not sure I see a big distinction.
Well, I think when most people think chocolate, no, I think there's a little bit. Cocoa to me is always, I think of it in the form of powder, usually that Dutch cocoa powder that you put in a cup. blend a little bit of warm milk into it and enjoy that. And it's pretty bitter until you mitigate the amount of sugar you come into. Whereas chocolate, by definition, suggests to me that you've had some level of sugar put into it. It will generally be more bitter or sweet depending on the cacao content in it. But generally, chocolate connotes something sweeter, cacao something more bitter. So, or cocoa, more bitter
Cocoa.
too. So, unless you're doing Ghirardelli cocoa at a Giant's game, that's pretty sweet stuff.
That's some pretty rich stuff.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Just
Shall
a
we
few
see where we're
seconds.
going? Or should we see the results of the poll? How
Yeah,
did we
for
do?
sure. I was
Did
just gonna
everybody
say,
vote?
we're gonna go.
Oh, we got Pinotage.
Yeah.
Pinotage. Well, Pinotage certainly has that depth of color, but Pinotage is going to give you, while it can give you a bit of a meaty sense, people talk about that sort of a jerky character to it. You're and a pepperiness to it. It's not going to be as earthy. You're getting that strong underlying kind of minerally, granitic sort of character that you're going to get there. And oftentimes with Pinotage, dare I say this, you get a Gouda funk in Pinotage that you simply are not finding here. There's a purity of expression here that does not take me there. And also the acidity, I mean, it doesn't take me to old world Hakeem, but I can understand why you might think that.
And Evan,
right.
if you look at the region results, we're at 55% old world and about 40% new world. So can we help folks out a little bit as we go?
Yeah, and I think that the high acid, the high tannin fat, because once again, if your tannins, your phenols don't get as ripe, the chains are not going to be as long and come together and soften. So the tannins here are pretty hard. They're pretty gritty. The acid level is pretty high, and any warmth you're getting probably is from a warmer vintage than anything. But this wine is a chiseled example of what it is. So we're going to leave Spain. We're going to stay in the old world. So for those of you who voted old world, you were in a good place. But we're going to go right next door. We're going to move over to France, and we're going to move over into a cru of the Northern Rhone Valley, and that is, of course, to the fabulous appellation of Crozes-Hermitage and the very Crozes-Hermitage focused house of the Cave Fayol, owned by Laurent Fayol and his family. And this is I think, again, I always try and do these themes here. First of all, you'll notice that at least thus far, we've gone old world, old world, old world, old world. We've also done studies in oak. Again, we talked about what Tim did in his wine. Go back to the Chardonnay that was there. We've done studies in tannins. As we've moved from sort of lighter in the Pinot, almost gossamer, as I said before, up there. So everything always has a subplot to it here. This one is about just the quintessentialness, I think would be another one. I think the Rioja before, pretty quintessential. Our Chardonnay, pretty quintessential. And this Crozes-Hermitage, very quintessential from Laurent Fayol. So we are here in the Northern Rhone Valley. What's important to note, and it's hard to discern on this particular map here, is that Crozes-Hermitage, within the context of Rhone, I guess you could see it is relatively large. It's certainly larger than Hermitage, and it's distinctly broken up into two areas, particularly if you talk to the old guard. So the original appellation was established in 1937 in the northern part, and it was really centered around three areas. One called Gervans, Gervans, which is where Laurent Fayol sits, but another one called Mercurol, and a third one simply called Crozes. And these wines were individually, before the appellation was created, marketed as Mercurol, Gervans, and Crozes. Then they all got together as the Crozes-Hermitage appellation, again, sitting just literally directly within the spitting distance, if you will, of Hermitage, and decided to do that. And that was great. But then in 1952, because of for various political reasons, et cetera, it expanded, and 5 new areas in the south end were added, which sit on a completely different terrain, completely alluvial rather than granitic and rockier, stonier soils, and produce wines that are much more approachable, much easier to do, but still within the Crozes-Hermitage appellation. So if you ever want to get into a food fight, talk about old Crozes and new Crozes and duck, because it'll be a lot of fun. But this estate is very much old Crozes. It was part of within there. Les Pontes is a particular lieu dit that is made there. It's about 8 hectares, I believe, in total, 8.65. It's 40-year-old vines. It is kept separately. And what's interesting about this, I just got a quick segue coming off of what Tim was just talking about, is this is a wine made exclusively out of destemmed fruit. And Syrah, before there was destemming and stemming, all Syrah in the Rhone Valley was obviously not destemmed. They didn't have the technology to do it, and they weren't going to pull one grape off before. So the movement towards looking at destemming and then coming back to some whole cluster and not is a very conscious effort. And I think what's important to understand here is what stems actually bring to the table, particularly when you're talking about Syrah. And I was over there a few months ago and had a very lengthy minimize the food fight conversation with the producer in Crozes Hermitage, and he was telling me that, and you can write this down or whatever, but I thought it was interesting points. One, stems with Syrah equal lower alcohol by volume and lower acidity levels. That if you have wines that are destemmed, your alcohol levels have the potential of being higher, and your acidity levels have the intention of being there. That the tannins are more in context with stems. Tim referred to this earlier, and oftentimes grittier and greener. That there's potentially less color, which is why you have some people who do Syrah and stuff like that and add Viognier or other white fruit for stabilizing color, particularly if they're using high amounts of stems in there, because again, you can get lower color leaching, and which is why in White Hermitage and I'm sitting here having a hard time. The other door, Cote Rôtie, why you can blend fruit into it, and then you get less reduction and you get more greener, stockier tannins. So there's a lot of choices that come in to how much this is done, to the point, and I'll leave it at this because I want to make sure Maddie has time, that you actually throw in stems separately after you've destemmed the fruit and vinified the fruit to pick some of that up. Particularly for the green tannin. So quite interesting. Laurent Fayol is a rock star in this part of the world, and young guy, took over from his parents and part of the new young guard of producers that you're seeing in this part of the world, and worth following. This guy is a rock star already, but even a more rock star in the making. Laurent Fayol.
Evan, congratulations. I feel like the new world, old world comparison is particularly, I mean, it's always helpful when you have these glasses, but it's very instructive in this particular flight. I feel like you're really getting the differences between the regions and the understanding.
Thank you. We're not into wine 6 yet, so we'll see how it plays out. But Maddie.
Yeah.
I will comment on two things about the Crozes. It's a big one and it needs air. So I strongly suggest that you play with it. You know, if it wasn't immediately expressive to you and you didn't get everything that Evan was getting because, you know, he's a super taster, it's revealing itself. Also, you will notice, and I'm curious to see if the website shows it. We referred to this as the producer includes fils, sons, et filles. And I've never seen that, sons and daughters. And that must be a new thing that's happening.
I didn't even notice that.
On French websites. Yay, the girls
are
in there too. Yay. Though I always thought, you know, the company of man is in terms of humanity. So wine number 6. And if I didn't have to power through 6, I wouldn't know where I was, because, you know, this is what I'm used to doing. So that said, visually, whoa, if you're wondering what stain is, you know, and we've been talking about seeing through it, not seeing through it. I can't see a damn thing if my life depended on it. You turn the glass and it is literally painting the glass. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get it off later. The color, which is opaque, and call it what you will. Some classicists might say like the darkest possible ruby. I mean, it's verging on purple, correct? And you let your eye move to the rim. There is not an ounce of gradation of color or lift in the hue until you get within spitting distance of the very rim, in which case there it is, it's violet, right? So this is indicating a wine that is young, that is made from smaller, very thick-skinned grape varieties or variety, and is, you know, it's got amazing concentration. If you swirl it a little bit, you know, the tears are trudging and they are purple. Yay. So it's telling us high. I've got color extract. I've probably got, you know, significant amounts of alcohol and other stuff too. So aromatically, you sure don't have to fight for this one either, you know, and I highly recommend, by the way, you sign up for Tim's seminar where he's going to talk about his book, because he's got me playing with where I hold my glass. to see if I can get, greedy creature that I am, more or different aromatics. And this wine jumps out at me, and it is perfectly ripe, almost verging on overripe fruit, but not. I can smell alcohol, so it's a big wine. It is dominantly black fruit right out of the glass. Cassis, black currant, black plum, perfectly ripe, like Evan was describing on the Syrah. There's maybe a little bit of red in there too, but I have to fight to find it on the nose. And in addition to that, the second wave is a beautiful complement of flowers. What am I putting up here in terms of things to look at? Oh, the red, blue, and black fruit, blueberry, right? Cooler climate or warmer climate wine. So we're looking at acidity levels and alcohol levels, and we're defining the tannin. So aromatically, again, dominantly black, some blue fruit, like super ripe blueberry, and flowers largely fresh, I think. Violets, dark flowers, maybe some rose in there too. There's a beautiful mintiness to it, high toned. That could be the alcohol or the varietal. So there's a green element, but it's not what we would call, for me, pyrazine. If there is pyrazine in this, it's definitely down the road. It's not primary. Black licorice for sure, a little bit of anise. There's oak on this wine, but the fruit is so pushy that it doesn't shove the fruit off the stage. It's very integrated. There's a little bit of, well, not a little bit, there's distinct organic earth. And when we're thinking organic versus inorganic, this is the time of year where we're out there, whether we know what we're doing, I don't, in the garden or not, with our little shovels and our trolls and everything, and we're turning dirt, and there it is. So there's turned dirt, clay. I'm curious to see if there's more inorganic expression on the palate, and that right now what's coming through is sweetness, both from the ripeness of the fruit and the oak. Oh my God, I've got 2 minutes. Okay, I'm going, Lee-May, don't worry. I can't help it if Evan's team picks out great wine and it seduces me. There you have it on the palate. The tannin, there's an attack of tannin. So the tannins are very interesting if I'm going to define them. And I'm going to immediately turn around and take another sip so that my palate adjusts to this grittier tannin. And I'm swallowing it as I'm not getting into a car tonight, even though I'm in Detroit. The tannins are gritty, but they don't shut the flavor of the wine down. They are integrated with the oak, and Tim can talk to this in the murky future better than I can, oak tannin versus grape tannin. Everything that I smelled is confirmed on the palate. There's the heat. So I'm defining the alcohol actually as moderate, but 13.5, maybe 14%. I don't often put a number on it. Chewing on fresh flowers, but I'm also, perceiving black currant, black licorice, black plum. There's the mintiness. Our poll came up. So what are we talking about? We are talking about, by the way, the acidity is moderate plus. The tannin is moderate plus, but it combines a round, rich texture with a little bit of a drying aspect to it. We're considering Cabernet Sauvignon blend. We're considering Touriga Nacional blend and Malbec blend. Well, the color ain't going to help you with these 3 grape varieties, because I tell you what, depending on where they're grown, they can look like this, right? Opaque, staining the glass, not budging in terms of gradation of color. So what are we looking at in terms of growing regions? France, certainly for Cabernet Sauvignon, not so much for Malbec anymore. So we're talking Bordeaux. Portugal, Touriga, yay, which is now allowable in Bordeaux Superior, I believe.
No, all of Bordeaux. All of Bordeaux.
Is it all of Bordeaux?
Yeah.
But I don't think you can plant it and can include it in classified growths yet.
And it can never be more than other grapes, more than like 10 or 15%.
A little scotch, yes.
Scotch.
And then Argentina for Malbec. So I don't think this is that easy. Remember, Cabernet can be
Grow
grown
everywhere.
in Argentina as well as
Yeah.
France. And I think that we should, how are we doing? I mean, I'm vying with 84% coming off Evan's last wine. Jump in the
Oh, we're
pond
good,
here.
we're good.
Don't overthink it.
So I'm gonna share the results.
Great.
We've got
Ah.
45% on Malbec and 35% on Touriga. So I do think that we have to help folks out a little bit here between the different varieties.
Well, yep. And I think I can do that. I mean, Touriga and Malbec both have a very distinctive florality that I adore. I'm so glad florality is a word. Cabernet Sauvignon, you know, I call it the little black elephant in the room. It dominates every damn thing, you know, so if it's blended with something, be it a grape variety that has different aromatics, particularly like Franc, which is not an option here, it may stomp on it, and Malbec as well. You know, there is, we talked about earthiness, but I don't think it commands my attention. There is both organic and inorganic. I didn't talk about it, but there is a stoniness to this wine on the palate, but it doesn't pull my attention the way Touriga would. And I also think, frankly, there's maybe a little bit more oak than would appear on a Douro Red or Dow for that reason. And thanks to Evan, I've been exposed to those. Yay. So what's our percentage of peeps who have responded? Can we reveal?
We were at 83%. So
Oh my God, I didn't win. I'm not competitive.
not
Sorry.
at all.
What were you going to say, Lee?
We're here, you know, just a clarification from Jerry. So any of the first, the Bordeaux, Evan, so they can include Touriga, you're saying, in Bordeaux?
So there are 7 grape varieties that were approved in 2021 to be added into Bordeaux. Touriga Nacional, Marcellan, Castets, and Arinaroa for red grapes, and Alvarinho and Leloria, which is another crazy grape for white grapes. There was I'm gonna take it back. There was a 7th one, Petit Montsang, but it didn't make the list. So Bordeaux AOC and Bordeaux Superior applied to use those varieties in 2019 moving forward. So that would be the case. I don't know, I might have misspoken with respect to putting it into the Grand appellations over time, although technically everything is part of within Bordeaux. But it can't be more than 5% of a vineyard area and 10% of the final blend moving forward.
And there isn't any in this wine because we are talking about both, wait for it, Cabernet Sauvignon, and the Cabernet is at 50%, the Malbec's at 40%, and there's poor little struggling Cab Franc at 10%. This is in Argentina. This is at an average altitude of 3,500 feet above sea level. Average. Napa brags about 2,600, right? We are young, 2019-18, you know, flip a coin. The larger region is Cuyo, but it embraces, that's the large central province, but it embraces Mendoza, La Rioja, and San Juan. And this is indeed Mendoza. I just love shots like this because it looks like a tourist shot, but it's real vineyards and you're at high desert, right? And then soaring up to 14,000 feet. This is Laura Catena, who, you know, an ambassador for Argentina in general, and named this particular, and her winemaker, Luis Reginata, she named this winery Luca, or this label Luca, for her newborn son. How cool is that? And she also called it Beso de Dante, or Kiss of Dante, because Dante Alighieri is the father of the Italian language. She must have been inspired in some respect then, because she speaks Spanish as her second language.
So,
4th generation Argentine, but you know, just a couple quick things. This was a label that was given birth to by Laura to celebrate old vine Malbec vineyards from the families from which she was buying the grapes. And they were the first to bottle that. You were going to say something?
So there's a question here. How would you go to Argentina with this Cabernet blend as opposed to Bordeaux?
I would say it would be more deductive. Why not Bordeaux as opposed to why Argentina? It feels New World to me. I taste it especially because Bordeaux would have more forest floor, maybe a little bit more cedar, cigar box. There would be a stronger expression of organic earth to me in Bordeaux. I don't think the oak would be as obvious on this wine. I think it would be, it works with the quality of this fruit, but there's definitely, whether you want, I call it the Starbucks flavor and fragrance, the combination of chocolate and cocoa, right, and vanilla. Just to remind us, the acidity is beautiful on this wine. You're at high desert. You have massive diurnal swings exceeded only by Paso Robles, I think, like 30, 40, 50 degrees. And you have no humidity. You have absolutely pure irrigation, the runoff from the Andes. It sort of dribbles. They call it furrow irrigation, though a lot of them use drip now. And again, you have naturally high acidity levels. I encourage everyone who hasn't played with it. To me, Argentine Cabernet, it doesn't suffer, but it sort of mopes in the shadow of Argentine Malbec because it is staggering value. And this is a blend. And you can see why I was saying I really think the little black elephant, is trumping a bit, but the florality of the Malbec is coming through on this wine. And I think the pyrazine aspect of the Cabernet Sauvignon has been mitigated. I love this wine, and the mouth feels wonderful. It's drying, but you don't need a lamb chop. It might be nice, but you don't need it.